The day began like any other, unremarkable, fragile in its normality. Children walked to school clutching holographic textbooks. Office workers filed into skyscrapers that scraped at the clouds. Farmers monitored their fields through augmented reality lenses. Above, satellites silently traced their orbits. Yet, within the deep dark beyond, something ancient and cold had already decided humanity's fate. The Galactic Concord had been watching for centuries. Their archives called Earth, Sol 3, a temperate rock with a violent species. For generations, debates raged within their halls: could humans be uplifted, integrated into the eternal harmony? Or were they too dangerous, too volatile? In the end, the decision wasn't made by philosophers or diplomats. It was made by machines' logic engines running simulations of Earth's trajectory. Every outcome ended the same: war, war with themselves. War with others, war without end, and so they came. It began with shadows blotting out the stars' Concord fleets larger than any human imagination, each ship a city unto itself. Dreadnoughts drifted into position, their hulls blacker than space, absorbing all light. Orbital bombardment platforms bristled with sterilizer arrays and nanite swarms. The first strikes were surgical, EMP pulses that crippled military satellites, kinetic rods dropped from orbit that punched craters into military installations, and bioplagues released into wind currents targeting livestock and crops within hours. Governments fractured. Panic spread faster than any weapon. New York burned first, not from invasion, but from riots and fires as systems failed. Tokyo's lights blinked out as its fusion reactors were sabotaged by Concord malware. Lagos was vaporized when an orbital lance pierced its power grid, triggering a chain reaction of explosions. Shanghai disappeared beneath a boiling tide as tidal manipulators induced a mega tsunami. 8 billion people reduced to 4 in a week. The Concord called it efficient containment. Yet in the ashes, something stirred. In Chicago's rubble, a young engineer named Layla Karam scavenged a downed Concorde drone, prying out its power cell to keep a hospital's life support systems running. In the Siberian wilderness, an old hunter named Grigory fashioned steel traps to ensnare Concorde patrol bots, teaching his grandchildren how to bait them with thermal signatures. In Mumbai, refugees huddled underground, listening as a blind teacher recited stories of ancient rebellion: Spartacus, Joan of Arc, the Warsaw Ghetto. Everywhere, humanity was bleeding. But everywhere, humanity was also learning. The Concorde's high councils observed these resistance sparks with disinterest. Primitive primates struggling against inevitability, they said. They will fade. But the AIs running their war calculus began spitting out anomalies, pockets of resistance lasting longer than predicted. Concorde drones going missing, sterilizer fields sabotaged. In Snow Paulo, guerrillas learned to take down Reapers towering biomechanical exterminators by luring them into old metro tunnels rigged with explosives. In Cairo, a boy barely 12 hacked into a Concorde supply drone and rerouted its cargo drop to a starving enclave. In Alaska, survivors built crude EMP weapons from scavenged car batteries and copper wiring, taking down low-altitude skimmers. It wasn't organized. It wasn't strategic. But it was relentless. The day our cities burned was not the day we died. It was the day we remembered what we are. The Concorde's high command didn't notice the change at first. To them, Earth was already a dying ember. Their armadas hovered in low orbit, black silhouettes against the red glow of burning cities. Automated harvesters drained oceans and devoured forests. Nanite swarms swept across the continents like locusts, breaking down organic matter into slurry to be stored in containment tanks. They believed they had broken humanity's spine. After all, the numbers favored them: 10,000 warships. Against a planet reduced to scavenging in its own ruins, their models predicted resistance would collapse in 72 cycles. But the models were wrong. In the charred husks of megacities, survivors adapted. Engineers and hackers emerged as unlikely generals, weaving together ancient communication systems, shortwave radios, underground fiber lines, even semaphore signals flashing from tower to tower. They called it SolNet, a decentralized web carrying whispers of defiance across continents. In Nairobi, technicians taught farmers to rewire Concord energy cells into makeshift plasma cutters. In Toronto, a crippled university AI was repurposed into an encryption hub, linking enclaves across the globe. The Concord escalated. They deployed Reapers and mass biomechanical titans bristling with weaponry, towering over skyscrapers, each programmed to exterminate every heat signature larger than a dog. Entire districts vanished in their path. But even these monstrosities were not invincible. In Manila, resistance fighters lured a Reaper into a trap using heat decoys, collapsing a skyscraper onto its chassis. In the Amazon, a network of tree-slung cables turned a Reaper's legs into tangled ruin, toppling it into a river where it shorted out in the water. Victory was measured not in battles won but in hours survived. Yet each victory no matter. How small spread hope like a contagion. SolNet became more than communication, it became memory. Stories of resistance traveled faster than Concord sensors could contain them. Legends grew, the wolves of Earth, small, fast, lethal teams that struck from shadows and left only wreckage. Children whispered about them in the dark, while enslaved aliens on distant Concord worlds listened to pirated transmissions and dreamed of rebellion. It wasn't long before the wolves turned their eyes skyward. From Concord wreckage, humanity began to build ships, crude, ugly, held together by scavenged alloys and sheer desperation. Their first launch failed catastrophically, killing all hands. The second sputtered out of orbit and was captured. But the third Calliope escaped. Calliope didn't carry weapons. She carried a message. One that was broadcast on all frequencies as she streaked past the Concord blockade. "We are still here." The Concord laughed at first, but then came Ares and Fenrir and Boudica. Ships designed for one purpose: to strike and vanish. 2. Bleed the invincible. The fire was spreading. And fires, once unleashed, don't ask permission to burn. By the fourth year, Earth no longer looked like a planet under siege, it looked like a battlefield forged in fire. The Concord sterilization campaign, once efficient and precise, had bogged down into a war of attrition. Their automated fleets hovered in low orbit like vultures circling a dying carcass, but the carcass had teeth now, and claws. The wolves of Earth, those ragged survivors who had scavenged Concord tech and turned it against its creators, had grown into more than a legend. They were a reality the Concord could no longer ignore. From makeshift shipyards hidden in ravines and caves, they launched more vessels every month. None were beautiful. None were sleek. They were ugly, jagged, patched-together monsters of steel and alien alloys, powered by stolen drives and armed with weapons humanity barely understood, but they flew. Their tactics were unorthodox. Instead of engaging in head-on battles, the wolves struck at soft target supply lines, refueling stations, isolated patrol ships. They used hit-and-run maneuvers perfected over centuries of guerrilla warfare on Earth. In the asteroid belt, a Wolf pack of 6 ships ambushed a Concord convoy, ripping apart 3 freighters before disappearing into the rocks. In orbit around Europa, resistance engineers detonated a Concord orbital foundry, sending molten metal cascading onto waiting fleet tenders below. Every strike was accompanied by a message broadcast on all channels. "We are the children of ashes, we are what you made us." For the first time, cracks appeared in the Concord's aura of invincibility. Minor worlds at the edge of their empire began to whisper about humanity, not as a species to be eradicated, but as a symbol of resistance. On the mining colonies of Altair 4, enslaved workers scrawled the human war symbol, raised fists around it, by flames onto walls and machinery. In the deep oceans of Thalassia, sentient aquatic beings sabotaged Concord harvesters after receiving clandestine transmissions from Earth. The Concord responded with escalation. They dispatched the Tithonus fleet, a 1,000-ship armada, to crush the wolves utterly. But the wolves didn't fight them in a single battle. Instead, they led Tithonus on a chase through the solar system, ambushing, withdrawing, striking again. Over 9 months, 327 Concorde ships were destroyed. Humanity lost 14 wolves in the process, each loss keenly felt, but each one taking dozens of Concorde warships with it. Captured Concorde soldiers spoke in hushed, fearful tones about humans who laughed as they charged into boarding actions with plasma axes, who sabotaged Concorde AI systems mid-battle, who used nothing but sheer willpower to override Concorde nanovirus attacks. Their captors didn't understand. This wasn't courage born of arrogance, it was defiance born of extinction. In a desperate move, the Concorde deployed Ashwind, an AI warlord designed for planetary sterilization. Ashwind's algorithms were flawless, its fleet coordination perfect. It hunted down human resistance cells on Earth with cold efficiency, turning swaths of the planet into glass. But Ashwind underestimated the humans' capacity for adaptation. When its fleet arrived above Mars to destroy the fledgling Volf shipyards, it found the planet empty. The humans had abandoned it only to reappear in Ashwind's system weeks later. Using a captured Concorde supercarrier as a Trojan horse, the wolves infiltrated Ashwind's command nexus. Engineers detonated antimatter charges at point-blank range, wiping out Ashwind's core and half its escort fleet in the process. The galaxy shuddered. In every corner of the Concorde's empire, oppressed species began to rise. Some rebellions lasted only days before being crushed. Others sparked into full-fledged insurgencies. But the message was clear: humanity was no longer alone. The wolves of Earth had become a storm, and in their wake the galaxy was catching fire. By the 5th year, the war had grown too large for even the Concorde's automated algorithms to contain. What had begun as a sterilization event on an insignificant backwater world now threatened to unravel a 1,000-year-old empire. It started small. In the L3 Nebula, miners enslaved for generations sabotaged their Concorde overseers using human-designed viral codes transmitted through stolen SolNet nodes. Their rebellion was crushed, but not before they broadcast one final message: "We are all children of ashes now. Burn with us." Across the galaxy, that signal traveled like a ghost. On the oceanic world of Corin, aquatic sentients hijacked Concorde submersibles, ramming them into fuel depots. On the tundras of Aurelian, insectoid workers staged a revolt. After decades of silent oppression, their leader citing a human phrase carved into Concorde walls: "The day our cities burned was the day we learned what we are." The Concorde deployed retribution fleets to suppress these uprisings, but each one encountered resistance harder and sharper than expected. For every rebellion crushed, 2 more ignited. Humanity's wolves didn't lead these revolts, but they inspired them. Meanwhile, the wolves struck harder and deeper. Their crude ships, patched with scavenged alien alloys, now carried experimental weapons crafted from Concorde tech grav lances, nanotestorms, AI disruptors. Each ship bore the names of fallen cities etched into its hull. Hiroshima, Aleppo, Johannesburg, Detroit called themselves the Fire Barn, and they carried no flags, only ashes. When the wolves entered the Taraxis Sector Key Concorde supply hub, they didn't just strike and retreat, they stayed. Over weeks, they waged a brutal guerrilla campaign, dismantling orbital stations, hacking planetary defense systems, and rallying enslaved populations. Concorde fleets arrived in overwhelming numbers to crush them. But by then it was too late. The sector was aflame. Taraxis had fallen not to humanity alone, but to a coalition of newly liberated species fighting side by side with their human saviors. On Earth, the remaining survivors watched the galaxy burn through stolen Concorde relays. Children born in bunkers and ruins cheered as footage showed human wolves boarding Concorde dreadnoughts, fighting in zero gravity with plasma knives and makeshift railguns. But the cost was high. Every victory came with blood. For every liberated world, 10 wolves fell. Entire generations grew up knowing nothing but war, yet their resolve hardened, not weakened. Humanity was no longer fighting for survival. They were fighting for something larger, an idea that no orbital lance or nanite swarm could sterilize. The Concorde's war councils convened in panic. For centuries, they had ruled through technological superiority and fear. Now they faced an enemy. They couldn't intimidate, couldn't reason with, couldn't erase. An enemy who had nothing left to lose. Their algorithms proposed a solution: total galactic sterilization of all rebellious systems, including Earth, but the High Lords hesitated. For the first time in a millennium, they felt fear, not just of humanity, but of their own collapsing empire. Because everywhere the Fireburn went, they left behind one message, carved into ruins, broadcast across all frequencies, burned into Concord databanks: "We are what you made us." And the galaxy listened. It began with a silence. Not the silence of peace or surrender, but the tense, coiled quiet before a predator strikes. The Concord's homeworld Arcanis Prime had never known war. For millennia, it had been a jewel of the galaxy, a place of towering spires and gentle seas where the High Council ruled from their crystalline citadel. No ship had ever breached its defenses. No rebellion had ever come close. The Concord believed it untouchable until now. On the edge of Arcanis Prime's system, humanity's wolves gathered not as a scattered guerrilla fleet, but as a single, unified armada. Over the years of war, they had forged their ragtag ships into something terrifying. Each vessel carried scars from countless battles, hulls patched with alloys stolen from the Concord's own ships. Some bore massive asteroid armor plating. Others bristled with reverse-engineered Concord tech gravity distorters, AI disruptors, and energy lances. But what struck fear into Concord strategists wasn't the size of the fleet. It was the names carved into the hulls: Nagasaki, Gaza, Tiananmen, Aleppo, New York, Johannesburg. Each ship carried the memory of a city burned, a people slaughtered, a world scarred. When the wolves jumped into the system, the Concord's planetary defense grid responded instantly. Tens of thousands of automated turrets lit up the void. Orbital fortresses powered up super-heavy lances capable of slicing a battleship in two. The Eternity Fleet, the pride of the Concord's navy, mobilized. Over 50,000 warships formed a near-impenetrable wall around Arcanis Prime. Against this overwhelming force came just over 8,000 human ships. The galaxy watched as an uneven battle unfolded in real time. On liberated worlds, children huddled around cracked screens, refugees on colony stations held their breath, and rebels in hidden strongholds whispered prayers in every language known. Then the wolves charged. The first wave was annihilated within minutes. Hundreds of human ships were torn apart by concentrated fire. Yet the survivors pressed on, weaving through debris fields and anti-ship mines with a predator's agility. They didn't fight like the Concorde expected. Instead of engaging in rigid formations, they struck like packs of wolves swarming single targets, disabling engines, then moving on. They rammed larger ships, boarding them in brutal hand-to-hand combat. Human fighters in exosuits tore through. Concorde quarters with plasma axes and jury-rigged rifles. Concorde officers unaccustomed to such savagery were overwhelmed. The wolves unleashed their secret weapons, Ashburn AI viruses. Coded by human hackers and embedded in captured Concorde cores, the viruses spread through the Concorde fleet like wildfire. Automated defenses turned on their masters. Dreadnoughts fired on allies. Defense grids went dark. The battle raged for 72 hours. The void was littered with the wreckage of thousands of ships, human and Concorde alike. But the wolves refused to break. Every fallen ship took a dozen enemies with it. For each fighter lost, another emerged from hidden hyperspace jumps. When the last Concorde carrier fell, broadcasting frantic distress signals, the human flagship Phoenix Ash broke through the defensive perimeter. Behind it came the remaining wolves, scarred, burning, but unbroken. They descended on Arcanis Prime like avenging gods. Cities that had never seen war now burned. Concorde elites fled into bunkers as human strike teams stormed the crystalline citadel. With plasma torches and scavenged weapons, they cut through defenses and stood face to face with the High Council, the architects of Earth's extermination. The leader of the wolves, a woman born in the ashes of Chicago, stared at the Concorde's ruling eye and spoke just two words: broadcast on every frequency across the galaxy, "Never again." Then she fired. The Citadel erupted in flames as Concord control collapsed. Across the Empire, automated fleets shut down. Oppressed species rose up, inspired by the sight of humanity frail, scarred, but victorious, bringing their overlords to their knees. The Concord's reign was over. The galaxy had not known silence like this for 1,000 years. Not since the first Concord fleet swept across the stars, subjugating world after world in the name of eternal harmony. But now their fleets lay scattered wreckage drifting in the void like dead gods. Arcani's prime, once a beacon of Concord power, was a smoldering ruin. Its crystalline towers reduced to slag, its oceans boiling, its proud banners torn down and replaced with a single, simple sigil, a clenched human fist rising from flames. Humanity did not celebrate. There were no parades in the streets, no triumphant speeches broadcast across liberated systems. The wolves had seen too much, lost too many, to feel victory's sweetness. For every Concord dreadnought burning in orbit, there were names carved into human ships' hulls, names of cities, families, and entire generations erased in the sterilization. But as the fires dimmed, a new sound rose across the galaxy. Not of war, but of rebuilding. On Earth, what remained of humanity stepped from the bunkers and ruins. Children born in underground shelters saw the sky for the first time. Engineers began repairing the fractured ecosystem, using Concord tech to regrow forests and purify oceans. Survivors planted seeds in scorched soil, not just of crops, but of hope. In orbit, the wolves, now no longer outlaws, but legends, turned their fleet into something new. No longer scavengers, no longer fugitives, they became the guardians. Their scarred ships patrolled liberated trade routes, defending fledgling colonies from pirates and remnants of Concord loyalists. Where once they brought fire, now they brought protection. The galaxy changed with them. On Thalasia, aquatic sentients erected monuments to the humans who taught them resistance. On Aurelian, insectoid hatchlings spoke their first words in Earth's language as symbols of solidarity. Across hundreds of worlds, the raised fist of humanity became a beacon, painted on walls and etched into armor. But not all was at peace. Survivors of the Concord's elite scattered to the far reaches, whispering of revenge. Rogai warlords still prowled dark sectors, and some among the wolves questioned whether peace could last or if humanity would one day turn its fire on itself. Yet one truth remained undeniable. The day our cities burned was not the day humanity died. It was the day we were reborn. From the ashes of genocide, from the wreckage of planets, humanity rose not as conquerors, but as something far more dangerous an idea. And as every species who had suffered under the Concord's boot now knew, ideas cannot be killed. For those who would threaten the innocent, there was now a single warning whispered in every shadowed corner of the galaxy. When humanity fights, the universe burns.